The Europeans were not wrong regarding the fall of native tribes. They came to this nation to prosper after the struggles of what happened in Europe. Europeans envisioned America as a future nation of great power and believed its rise would be unparalleled. Hold on there, Mark. Do you realize what Europeans did to settle in America? I've covered a little of it. I know some of the diseases brought over by Europeans killed some of the Native Americans, but that wasn't their fault. Mark, you're missing so much more than just that. Let me enlighten you on the true history of what happened. In much of the case, it's the idea of facing east versus facing west. What is the idea of facing east? The idea of facing west was rooted in keeping Europeanism and industrialism. Look at the example of Roanoke Island. A man who spoke the Algonquian language had stumbled across 3 settlers. While the settlers could not communicate, they could infer that this man meant no harm or violence and welcomed them with open arms. While early promise had started, it wasn't long before violence broke out. Why did violence break out? Great question. In the late 1940s, the Spanish took a significant jump in colonizing America, and the British were desperately trying to catch up. Seeing that the Spanish took much control of it and led the British to use rapid colonization and unleash violence on the native people. And in their minds, they believed they were doing the right thing because Christianity had backed their violence and gave them the right to do so. How many tribes did this happen to? I'm sorry, Mark, but these were not tribes. Native people had organization and organized themselves into self-governing policies with their own structure, laws, and economic structure. If facing the east was about industrialization and keeping ties to Europe, what would facing west entail? Facing west concerns the original idea of what the plan was when it came to America. Facing west was about creating an environment where people could be free and start a new life. It wasn't necessarily about finding unlimited riches in America, but the ability to own land and reign economic independence from European persecution. I know slavery was pretty common in Europe at the time, but when people were coming over, did they plan on using enslaved people? None of the Europeans that came over had any intention of using enslaved people, which goes back to this idea of facing west, where man, with his new land discovered, will be free for all. But the growing demand for workers made them heavily rely on African slaves. While the Native Americans were forced into slavery, it's difficult to force people who are already there to be enslaved. But I read in Columbus's letter that I thought the native people would become